the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Fission radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear.
Good morning. How is everybody today? My name is Ron, and I am Sane Environmentalist. I want to say hello to all of our UCY.TV listeners. Don't forget to pitch in a couple bucks. Enough for a cup of coffee makes a huge difference in the big picture, so we can keep this whole thing rolling. So I'm going to follow up on last week's interview that I transcorded. And, the reason that my interest in the whole, let's start out by calling it the chemtrail conspiracy, okay, is that it seemed unnatural, it seemed recent, and it's not something that I remember as a kid. And I think that's pretty much across the board. Almost everybody's like, well, that's a new phenomenon in the sky going on. That's not something that was happening even 10 years ago. And, what is it? What are they doing? And you look up chemtrails, and what do you get? You get a bunch of conspiracy theory. Okay. Because indeed, and if you ask any climate scientist, or scientists, they will deny the existence of chemtrails. Okay, they're like, there's no such thing as a chemtrail. It's like, okay. So I this morning was sitting here and I'm thinking about that and chemtrails and contrails, and I'm like, well, what are they doing? If you look at it scientifically, they are basically injecting aerosols into the upper atmosphere, into the stratosphere. And so I did a Google search for high altitude aerosol injection. Okay. And I came up with a Wikipedia page by the name of stratospheric aerosol injection, and in quotes, climate engineering. And I'm like, well, this is like, okay. So here's what it is. So I finally figured it out. Okay. And I'm going to read pretty much for the rest of this hour. I'll pitch in, but there's a bounty of good information here on exactly what they're doing to the sky and why we now have what we call the white sky syndrome. I hear personally in Arizona, actually, just stepping back for a second, recently, like right before Christmas or right after Christmas, they did this lay down, and I've got YouTube videos of it, where the entire sky was just literally blanketed by airplane exhaust. like chemtrails or whatever they are, contrails, completely blanketed. And a couple of observations now, a few weeks later, everybody got sick. Everybody got upper respiratory phlegm, crap, coughing, not really much of a fever or I'm really shaking sick, more just an upper respiratory infection just from whatever is in the air that we were breathing. And it was I would say 60% of the people, especially people like myself who were outside breathing air and exercising or moving vigorously, have this long-term, and I still have it, you can hear it in my voice, long-term, low, irritating cough in the deep, deep, deep part of my lungs. It's like something's trying to come out. And as well, the temperature dropped precipitously by about, I didn't say, an average of 15 degrees right after that. And it feels now like it's rebounding. They aren't doing the spraying anymore. And I haven't seen another incident like that one, at least. I see a few here and there, but not an incident like that one. And the temperature is starting to go up again, closer to what I would consider normal. So I found this Wikipedia article, and I'm going to start reading that. The ability of stratospheric sulfate aerosols to create a climate dimming effect has made them a possible candidate for use in solar radiation management climate engineering projects to limit the effect and impact of climate change due to rising levels of greenhouse gases. Delivery of precursor sulfide gases such as sulfuric acid, hydrogen sulfide, or sulfur dioxide by artillery, aircraft, and balloons has been proposed. It presently appears that this proposed method could counter most climatic changes, take effect rapidly, and have a low direct implementation cost, and be reversible in direct climate effects, i.e. that if you stop doing it, it goes back to normal. One study calculated the impact of injecting sulfate particles or aerosols every 1 to 4 years into the stratosphere in amounts equal to those lofted by a volcanic eruption of Mount Funabutu, but did not address the many technical and political challenges involved in potential solar radiation management efforts. Solar radiation management, or SNRM, they have an industry code name for it. Okay, this is a thing. They are found to be economically, environmentally, and technologically viable. Such injections could provide a grace period for up to 20 years before major cutbacks in greenhouse gases would be required. It has been suggested that the direct delivery of precursors could be achieved using sulfide gases such as dimethyl sulfide, sulfur dioxide, carbonyl sulfur, or hydrogen sulfide. These compounds would be delivered using artillery aircraft such as high-flying F-135Cs or balloons and result in the formation of compounds within the sulfate anion, sulfate SO4 with a 2 above it. According to estimates, 1 kilogram of well-placed sulfur in the stratosphere would roughly offset the warming effect of several 100,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide. Arguments for the technique include: it mimics a natural process. Stratospheric sulfur aerosols are created by existing natural processes, especially volcanoes, whose impacts have been studied via observation. This contrasts with other more speculative solar radiation management techniques, which do not have natural analogs, i.e. a space sunshade. It is technologically feasible, in contrast to other proposed solar radiation management techniques, such as marine cloud brightening and space sunshades, much of the required technology is pre-existing. Chemical manufacturing, artillery shells, high-altitude aircraft, weather balloons, etc. Cost. The low-tech nature of this approach has led commentators to suggest that it would cost less than many other inventions. Cost cannot be derived from wholly objective fashion, as pricing can only be roughly estimated at the early stage. However, many sources suggest that it would be cheap relative to cutting emissions. The annual cost of delivering 5 million tons of the albedo is predicted to sufficiently offset the expected global warming over the next century. Sulfur dioxide can be purchased online for as little as $500 per ton. In comparison, the annual cost estimates for climate damage and emissions mitigation range from $200 billion to $2 trillion. And finally, the efficacy. Most proposed solar radiation management techniques can only produce a limited intervention in the climate. One cannot reduce the temperature by more than a certain amount with each technique. New research by Linton and Vaughan suggests that this technique may have a higher radiative forcing potential. There's another keyword, radiative forcing potential. Efficacy issues include the lifespan of the aerosols. Tropospheric sulfur aerosols are short-lived. Delivery of particles into the lower stratosphere in the Arctic will typically ensure that they remain aloft only for a few weeks or months, as air in this region is predominantly descending. To ensure endurance, higher altitude delivery is needed, ensuring a typical endurance of several years by enabling injection into the rising leg of the Brewer-Dobson circulation above the tropical tropophase. Further, sizing of particles is crucial and to their endurance. Aerosol delivery. There are two proposals on how to create stratospheric sulfate aerosol clouds, either through release of a precursor gas such as sulfur dioxide or the direct release of sulfuric acid, H2SO4. And these face different challenges. If sulfur dioxide gas is released, it will oxidize to form sulfuric acid and then condense to form droplets far from the injection site. Releasing sulfur dioxide would not allow control over the size of the particles that are formed and would require a sophisticated release mechanism. Possible side effects include ozone depletion is a potential side effect of sulfur aerosols, and these concerns have been supported by modeling levels of CFCs and other ozone-destroying gases, watching them fall to safe levels because stratospheric aerosols together with the ozone-destroying gases are responsible for ozone depletion. Whitening of the sky. Stratospheric aerosols have the potential to whiten the sky and cause more colorful sunsets, depending on the amount being sprayed. However, according to a study on cleaner air resulting, solar brightness has been responsible for an increase in corn production over the last 30 years. Let's read that one more time. Stratospheric aerosols have the potential to whiten the sky and cause more colorful sunsets. Dependent on the amount being sprayed, according to a study on cleaner air, resulting solar brightening has been responsible for an increase in corn production over the last 30 years. So they're basically saying right there that this has been going on for at least 30 years. They've been injecting or whitening the sky. And all you got to do is go to my YouTube page, and there's some pretty sunset and sunrise pictures there. You know. So yeah, we got dosed. I know we did. Tropophase warming and the humidification of the stratosphere. Regional warming, based on the results of a 2015 geoengineering model intercomparison project, a model with a standard stratospheric injection scenario. Temperatures in the tropics would cool, with higher latitudes warm. Ice sheet and Arctic sea ice decline would still continue, albeit at a reduced rate. Extreme temperature anomalies would also still increase, but to a lesser degree in regards to these models. Results of the author on the study, Alan Robach, noted. This is what he said. If geoengineering were halted all at once, there would be a rapid temperature and precipitation increase of 5 to 10 times the rate from gradual global warming. Have they literally been doing this for years? Are they literally controlling the climate on the planet by injecting this stuff? And could it really be that simple? Okay, on. Stratospheric temperature change. Aerosols can also absorb some radiation from the sun, the earth, and the surrounding atmosphere. This changes the surrounding air temperature and could potentially impact on the stratospheric circulation, which in turn may impact the surface circulation. Regional hydrologic responses. Based on the results of a geoengineering model intercomparison project, there would be a reduction in the global average precipitation around the world, particularly in summer monsoon regions. Health effects. While the sulfate particles are natural, they still have potential health effects. Minimizing these effects is principally achieved by ensuring that the particular particles stay aloft as long as possible, thus reducing the tonnage returning into the lower atmosphere. Aerosol formation. Primary aerosol formation, also known as homogeneous aerosol formation, results when the gaseous sulfur dioxide combines with water to form aqueous sulfuric acid. This acidic liquid solution is in the form of a vapor and condenses onto particles of solid matter, either meteoric in origin or from dust carried from the surface to the stratosphere. Secondary or heterogeneous aerosol formation occurs when this vapor condenses onto existing aerosol particles. Existing aerosol particles or droplets also run into each other, creating larger particles or droplets in a process known as coagulation. Warmer atmospheric temperature also leads to larger particles. These larger particles would be less effective at scattering sunlight because of the peak light scattering is achieved by particles with a diameter of 0.3 microns. Wow. My mind is literally blown reading this. Methods. Various techniques have been proposed for delivering the aerosol precursor gases. The required altitude to enter the stratosphere is the height of the tropophase, which varies from 11 kilometers or about 36,000 feet to 58,000 feet at the equator. Airliners could use lower quality sulfur-rich fuels on higher altitudes. That approach would utilize regular flights and enable airliners to use cheaper fuels on long-distance flights. Holy crap. Pardon my language, but holy mackerel on that. It would require using separate fuel tanks for takeoff and landing in populated areas due to the toxicity and olfactory sensations of sulfur oxides. This can be achieved in many airliners without difficulty since they already have separate and selectable wing and fuselage fuel tanks. Civilian aircraft, including the Boeing 747-400 and Gulfstream G550 and 650, could be modified at relatively low cost to deliver sufficient amounts of the required material. Military aircraft such as F-15C variant and the F-15 Eagle have the necessary flight ceiling but limited payload. Military tanker aircraft such as the KC-135 Stratotanker and the KC-10 Extender also have the necessary ceiling and have the greater payload capacity. Modified artillery might be necessary to do this, but requires polluting and expensive gunpowder charge to loft the payload. Railgun artillery could be a non-polluting alternative. And high-altitude balloons can be used to lift precursor gases in tanks. Bladders in or on the balloon envelopes. Balloons can also be used to lift pipes and hoses. Material options. Precursor gases such as sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide have been considered. Use of gaseous sulfuric acid appears to reduce the problem of aerosol growth. Materials such as photoeretic particles, titanium dioxide, and diamond are also under consideration. And then from the Idaho Observer. And this is, I don't know who this individual is. I think they're from Idaho, however. But there's this page, it's called proliberty.com is the name of the website that's hosting this. And this is from the March 2010 Idaho Observer. Megatons of aluminum to rain down from global experiment. It took Indian media journalist Mike Murphy to do what the mainstream media could not or would not do. Report on the alarming threat coming out of the annual American Association for the Advancement of Science meeting in San Diego. Geoengineering scientists are planning on dumping up to 20 megatons of aluminum each year into our lives. Geoengineering is the artificial modification of the Earth's climate systems to reduce the effects of global warming. Industrial-sized GE projects range from the declassified experiment like ocean iron fertilization to a highly classified dangerous experiment like aerosol spraying, chemical spraying. Scientist David Keith, standing aside fellow geoengineers Ken Calderia and Alan Radbach, said in a geoengineering seminar on February 20th, and see, that's another key word, geoengineering. You know, I have personal issues with that word. I think it's stratospheric aerosol injection in order to, you're trying to control climate, not the Earth. So they decided to switch their stratospheric aerosol method from sulfur to aluminum. They went on to say that 10 to 20 megatons per year of aerosolized aluminum will be sprayed into the atmosphere to deflect sunlight in order to halt global warming. No journalist prior to Murphy, and even now, has reported on the bait and switch by geoengineers. Dane Wigington, a climate researcher and solar expert, cornered Keith in the question and answers that followed. Wigington: did you do a study on human respiration? 10 megatons of aluminum dumped into the atmosphere will have no human health impacts? Keith answers, let me be more careful here to separate out the toxicological crux. The aluminum. We have only begun to research and published nothing, mostly worked on sulfur and the relevant comparison is that just as Roebuck said, referring to sulfur particulate number studies mentioned by Alan Roebuck, that now they lost me. On March 22nd to 26, 2010, the Climate Response Fund is sponsoring a seminar international conference on climate intervention technologies in Monterey, California. This is in 2010. This conference will address and develop guidelines for research and testing of proposed climate intervention and geoengineering technologies. Independent journalists have been rejected interest to the Monterey meeting, contrary to statements made outside of it. Yeah, so that is from the Idaho Observer. And now we're going to go over to rense.com. And I was kind of studying at that point, going, well, what are the health effects? I mean, it certainly does not sound good. Sulfuric acid particles and aluminum sprayed in the air. Doesn't sound really healthy at all to me. And I get what they're trying to do. I get that they're trying to cool the climate down. It's kind of analogous, in my opinion, to healing a wound by packing the dirt with poop and then taping it over. Honestly, what do we're going to fight this effect that we're creating by creating an equally nasty effect that just does something different. That's what I'm seeing here. As if we have the wisdom, as we're beginning to get to the point where we might have the wisdom someday, but we don't today. We don't have the wisdom to understand the changes we're making and how it's going to affect the whole entire web of life on this planet, which is extremely fragile. I think in a lot of ways we think we are so tough, but we aren't. We're very fragile. And we're dependent upon this environment. And the more we mess with it, the more it's going to fight back against us. Now we are truly acting like a virus. So this rense.com, RENSE article is called Chemtrails and Aluminum Harm Heart, Lungs, and Plants. Chemtrails, which are known to contain heavy metals such as barium oxide and aluminum oxide, are known to be a bigger problem than once thought. Others have researched chemtrails in great length, but may have known about its negative effects on ecology, but may not have known about the negative effects on ecology, the environment, and human beings, which have recently been discovered. This essay is meant to create awareness, not panic. Have you ever been standing at a gas pump waiting for your vehicle to fill up out in the country, or what you thought had clean, fresh air? Did you also notice the top surface of the pump housing may have been covered with rough gray dust? Much of that material can be from chemtrail fallout from aluminum and barium oxide. What goes up must come down, and all of us are breathing it. Sickness almost always visits communities within 1 to 3 days after spraying has taken place. I can attest to that. Headaches, coughs that won't go away, sore throats, and head and upper body chest congestion are not uncommon. This is exactly the symptoms our community had after this big spraying. Your body does not want this metal embedding itself into your respiratory tract and it becomes an irritant. Research shows that aluminum oxide, which is a heavy metal, can do far more damage to human beings than once thought. The metal can also affect plants and is far more insidious than once thought. Effects of aluminum oxide on heart and lungs. A paper written by Warren Lee of Escatir and Brainwath, the Thecal Group, warns of hazards from aluminum oxide nanoparticles. In the paper that they express concern that epidemiological studies suggest that an association between inhaled ambient particulate material and adverse cardiopulmonary effects exist. The mechanism related to this toxicity is still unclear. Their paper shows methods to control ultrafine particles to limit inhaled nanoparticles in humans. The effects of aluminum on ecology. Is the government silent about the negative effects of aluminum? From the EPA website, we read the following about the acid effects and aluminum. The 22-page paper contains numerous references to scientific papers which are available on the EPA's website. Acid deposition can occur in the wet or dry form and can adversely affect aquatic resources through the acidification of water bodies and watersheds. Acidification of aquatic ecosystems is the primary concern because of the adverse effect of low pH and associated high aluminum concentrations on fish and other aquatic organisms. Aluminum, which can be toxic to organisms, is soluble at low pH and is leached from watershed soils by acidic disposition. Acidification may affect fish in several ways. The direct physiological effect of low pH and high aluminum include increased fish mortality, decreased growth, and decreased reproductive potential. The mechanisms of toxicity involves impaired ion regulation of the gill. Population losses occur frequently because of recruitment failure, specifically due to an increased mortality of early life stages. Changes at other trophic levels may affect fish populations by altering food availability. By combining information on relevant water chemistry parameters, pH, aluminum, calcium, fish toxicity models, and historical and concurrent distributions of fish populations in lakes and streams, included dominant sources of acidity in 100% of acidified lakes studied. This is a stark contrast to the West region, where none of the acidic lakes studied were dominated by acid deposition. Notably, the sample size of the lakes for this reason was small to begin with. Aluminum causes problems with fish by interfering with the ability of the gills to take oxygen from the water. The aluminum works with acidic water to create a toxic environment for wildlife in lakes and streams. Aluminum is connected with ecological damage since it is a heavy metal. And who is spraying the aluminum oxide everywhere at high altitude? The government themselves. This is clearly another case of the left doesn't know what the right is doing, or perhaps it may not want to. Effects on plant growth. Researchers at the New Jersey Institute of Technology have demonstrated that plants can be harmed by nanoparticles. Professor Diane Watts, a toxicology expert, and a postdoc Ling Yang performed research and reported that aluminum oxide nanoparticles in groundwater inhibited the growth of corn, cucumbers, cabbage, carrots, and soybeans. So remember they were saying that they were getting higher corn yields because of the whitening of the sky? And then on the other end, then the aluminum's going into the plants. So it's becoming part of the whole ecosystem. There was an assumption that nanoparticles had no effects on plants, but we have shown that seedlings can interact with nanoparticles such as aluminum oxide, and they can have a harmful effect on seedlings and perhaps stunt the growth of plants. Watson and his postdoc grew seedlings in petri dishes using water with aluminum oxide nanoparticles. After just 7 days, the effects of stunted growth were measurable. Could aluminum also affect human fetus development via the bloodstream? We do not yet have conclusive data on this. But nanoparticles are used for scratch-resistant coatings, sunscreens. Ironically, the aluminum oxide is also used as environmental catalyst used for remediating polluted soil. Exhaust systems, chimneys, or smokestacks can mix with rainwater and snow to gradually, irreversibly pollute groundwater and soil. Oppenheimer wrote a paper many years ago how barium oxide and aluminum oxide could be dispersed at a very high altitude to reflect the sun's heat back into space, would stay suspended for some period of time. But what if he was wrong? What if chemtrail spraying is a real source of the greenhouse effect? Is it merely a coincidence that since this aggressive worldwide spraying program began, the poles are melting and the winters are growing warmer than ever before? Perhaps the true objective all along was to warm up the earth, not cool it. That was a brilliant article. So that's what we're dealing with here. You know, what we're dealing with is I'm going to call them the Illuminati. I think it's above big government. I think it's people who can do things, and because this is in plain sight, is it not? I mean, all of the evidence that I've uncovered just this morning leads me to the conclusion that this is not only real, but it is a thing, and they are doing it. And furthermore, they have been doing it for like 30 years. For 30 years, they've been trying to control the climate on the planet through aerosol spraying of the atmosphere and injecting nanoparticles into the atmosphere. And I think that there might be another reason why. I think that there's certain key places maybe where they inject the particles so that they reach that column, that air column, and get carried up and over and into the upper atmosphere where they can stay for years up there. You know, each one reflecting a little bit of sunlight floating around. Those photons don't hit the earth. You know, Dane Leington, who is a leader in this, the reason he got involved was all of a sudden his level of solar power. He solar powers his house. He worked for the same industries basically that are doing this, and they became untenable, and he quit. But he has not only solar power at his home, but he also has hydropower and wind power. And he says all three of them fell off. And he's like, what the heck is going on? I can see the sun, but the sky is a weird white color. Well, what it is a certain percentage of those photons are being blocked. And so there literally just isn't as much sun hitting the surface of the planet. Isn't that bizarre? And what happens then is they've discovered through studying volcanoes is that basically that middle band of real wet air that kind of rides over the equator-ish, maybe goes a little north or south of it here or there, that moves to the north when there's higher sulfide levels in the northern atmosphere. But then to the south, it becomes a desert. And so basically, you could destroy the Amazon rainforest with the wrong kind of aerosol injection pattern, which would push all that wetness up and out of the Amazon and up into North Africa, which would get rain and prosper, but then the Amazon would die off. How are we letting this happen, folks? How are we letting this happen? There's here's another interesting bit, and this is from harvard.edu. It's an abstract of some sort. And the study was titled "The Benefits and Risks and Costs of Stratospheric Geoengineering." Abstract of it is, injecting sulfate aerosol precursors into the stratosphere has been suggested as a means of geoengineering to cool the planet and to reduce global warming. The decision to implement such a scheme would require the comparison of its benefits, dangers, and costs to those of other responses to global warming, including doing nothing. Do you notice that there's never, ever, we got global warming, how can we stop it? Well, let's absorb more of the okay, so we got the right idea. Absorb more of the sunlight and keep it from turning into heat, right? That's what the whole idea of this. Want to send it back out into space is. Well, what if you put solar panels on top of everything? That would absorb a lot of the sunlight, and it would reduce a lot of the heat, and it would turn that heat and that sunlight into electricity. At which point, if you had enough of them, you wouldn't need power plants burning coal and wood and other things. You wouldn't need gasoline-powered cars anymore because everything could be electric. The strongest things on the planet are electrically powered. Trust me. That's why haven't we thought that way? Why do we think, the only way to do it is to do some kind of crazy thing? Use it to balloons full of tanks of gas, and then we'll disperse this gas, and then that'll reflect light back into space. It's so high tech, it's fucking retarded. Pardon me, it's literally retarded. It's just such a backwards way of thinking about how to do it. That's kind of like saying, I got this smoker's cough. There's nothing I can do about it, so I'm going to have to take a bunch of sugary cough drops 50 times a day and unhealthy antihistamines to try to stop it. But the bottom line is that if I just stop smoking or slow down or even cut back on smoking, the cough will go away. This is the kind of backwards thinking we got going on here. Here, this study evaluates the factors for stratospheric geoengineering with sulfate aerosols using existing U.S. military fighter and tanker planes. The annual cost of injecting aerosol precursors into the lower stratosphere would be several $billion. Using artillery or balloons to lob the gas would be much more expensive. We do not have enough information to evaluate more exotic techniques, such as pumping the gas up through a hose attached to a tower or balloon system. Anthropogenic stratospheric aerosol injection would cool the planet. Anthropogenic anthropogenic stratospheric aerosol injection would cool the planet, stop the melting of sea ice and land-based glaciers, slow the level of sea rise, and increase terrestrial carbon sink, but produce regional drought, ozone depletion, less sunlight for solar power, and make skies less blue. Furthermore, it would hamper Earth-based optical astronomy, do nothing to stop ocean acidification, and present many ethical and moral issues. Further work is needed to qualify many of these factors and allow informed decision-making. And this was, what year? I'm looking for a year, 2009. But this was studied. So that is amazing. How do we let them get away with this stuff? You know, who do you talk to? Who do you complain to? That's what I'd like to know. You know, who do you talk to? Here we go. Unintended consequences of atmospheric injection of sulfate aerosols. It's a Sandia report. Barry Goldstein, Peter Kovos, and Patrick Brady. Prepared by the Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque. Unintended consequences. So they're doing this, okay? If it's having unintended consequences, then they're doing it, you know? Geoengineering is the, quote, large-scale engineering of our environment in order to combat or counter-effect the effects of changes in atmospheric chemistry. This is from the National Academy of Scientists in 1992. In particular, to mediate the effects of elevated greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide concentrations. The surface temperature of the Earth results from the net balance of incoming solar shortwave radiation and outgoing terrestrial longwave radiation. One category of geoengineering options attempts to rectify the current and potential future radiative imbalance, either by reducing the amount of solar radiation absorbed by the Earth or increasing the amount of long-range radiation emitted by the Earth. The shortwave options can be subdivided into those that seek to reduce the amount of solar radiation reaching the top of the atmosphere, and those that seek to increase the reflection of short-range radiation within the atmosphere or at the surface. Most climate scientists believe that climate geoengineering is best considered as a potential complement to the mitigation of CO2 emissions rather than as an alternative to it. Strong mitigation could achieve equivalent of up to minus 4 watts per meter squared of radiative forcing on the century time scale relative to the worst case scenario for the rising CO2. However, to tackle the remaining 3 watts per meter squared, which are likely even at the best case scenario, to be strong. So, okay. I got lost. Sorry, guys. However, to tackle the remaining 3 watts per meter squared, which are likely, even in the best case scenario, strongly mitigated CO2 releases, a number of geoengineering options show promise. Only placing sunshades in space or increasing planetary albedo by injecting stratospheric aerosols have the potential to roughly cancel the projected mitigation CO2 radiative forcing. The costs of constructing and placing sunshades into orbit are obviously much greater than land-based injection and expensive phosphate aerosols into the atmosphere. Sulfate aerosols into the atmosphere. The ability to rapidly titrate or titrate sulfate atmospheric concentrations is also a distinct advantage when attempting to control complex and interacting global systems, because it is the most likely form of geoengineering to be implemented. An examination of the possible unintended consequences of the implemented particles are needed. So unintended consequences could include changes in the amount of and location of global precipitation, changes in the color and brightness of the sky, delay in the mitigation of ozone loss, increase in acid rain, rapid warming if atmospheric sulfate aerosols injection abruptly stopped, decreased insulation for energy production from solar, thermal, and photovoltaic technologies, increase in plant productivity, and differential change in regional climates, and worsening of negative health effects. So they found that this is going to changes in the brightness of the sky. To compensate for the doubling of CO2, which causes a greenhouse warming of 4 watts per meter squared, the required continuous stratospheric sulfate loading would be a sizable 5.3 teratons, producing an optical depth of about 0.04. The Rayleigh scattering optical depth of about 0.5 nanometers is about 0.13, so that some whitening on the sky occurs. But also colorful sunsets and sunrises would occur. It should be noted, however, that considerable whitening of the sky is already occurring as a result of current air pollution in the continental boundary layers. Absorption by carbon in single and composite particles decreases as the wavelength is increased in the visible band, thus resulting in red shifts of the color of the sky. Single atmospheric soot grains are very absorbing, and they can interact with sulfate droplets and become even more absorbing. Single sulfate droplets contribute very little to light absorption. As a rule of thumb, carbon dims and red shifts daylight through selective absorption, whereas sulfuric acid enhances the aforesaid effect of carbon on light through microlensing. Wow. Increase in acid rain. Additional acid deposition would result from geoengineering using sulfate aerosols, but it will not be sufficient to negatively impact most ecosystems, with the exception of waterways. Yeah, we don't need waterways for anything, right? And every region has a critical loading value, a full order of magnitude above the total amount of acid deposition that would occur under this geoengineering scenario. So if they quit doing it, so if they start doing this and then they quit, you get a phenomenon of rapid warming. Now see, how do they know all this? This is like a study at our Sandia National Laboratories. They're doing this. This is occurring. Okay? Don't think it's not. If geoengineering proceeds for a finite time interval and ceases afterwards, A large disparity between the applied radiative forcing and current state of the climate system develops. Even large surface air temperatures changes are predicted to occur after geoengineering stops at a regional level. One of the models shows that for complete CO mitigation, these SAT changes could be large, up to 3K per decade in the interiors of Eurasia, North America, for the uniform latitudinal distribution of stratospheric sulfates, and up to 5K per decade for other distributions with a maximum of 70 degrees. And the decrease in power from solar. So is that just insane? Well, that is the most childlike thing I can really think of. That as a species, humanity, we're so special, we're so gifted. We have this big, beautiful brain, and we can think things out. We can build stuff and create stuff. But we just got it backwards on this one. We got it backwards. This is a non-starter. This is one of those situations where it's like instead of forcing us to get an electric car, for instance, or emit almost no carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, instead of forcing that on us, you would rather secretly spray us with hydrogen sulfide and nanoparticles and do damage that we don't even know in future generations what it could be. We're talking aluminum metal toxicity here. That's why my lungs are jacked up, and now I understand this. Then this is happening. They are doing this. Who are they? I'm thinking, go to a climate conference and get a list of the top names at a climate conference, or that's where you're going to find the people doing this. Your climate engineers are the people that are going to climate conferences. But I mean, I cited Harvard and a few sources today it's the Sandia National Laboratory. That's what I was just reading from. So it's real, folks. Get a hold of your representative, make a phone call, say, what are you doing? If it is happening, stop it. If you don't know, investigate it. Get on the backs of our representatives as they were to try to get them to stop this horrible abuse of not only our health, but of the very surrounding earth itself. Plants and seedlings and everything suffer from this, Just a terrible situation. So my name is Jerome. I am the Sane Environmentalist, and you can catch me at youtube.com. I am the Sane Environmentalist there. Try to do videos. I've been working full-time recently, so I don't really have that much time. I will be back tomorrow. I'll try my best.